is from Lamentations. And I'm reading from the 3rd chapter, verse 22 through 33. This is kind of the midsection, the heart, the cheerful part of Lamentations, we might say. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore I will hope in him. The Lord is good to those who wait for him, to the soul that seeks him. It is good that one should wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord. It is good for one to bear the yoke in youth, to sit alone in silence when the Lord has imposed it, to put one's mouth to the dust. There may yet be hope. To give one's cheek to the smiter and be filled with insults. For the Lord will not reject forever. Although he causes grief, he will have compassion according to the abundance of his steadfast love. For he does not willingly afflict or grieve anyone. Well, it's a Sunday morning in June. What we've already seen on a Sunday morning and heard, green trees, songs of birds, that almost already constitutes a sermon. And we could just go home. The other thing we could do is turn on YouTube and listen to President Obama sing Amazing Grace. How many of you heard that? But I'm trying to take lessons from Mike Fike, and he usually starts a sermon with a clever joke or two. But today's reading is Lamentations, and our topic is weeping and loss. Difficult to make jokes about that. So I'm going to turn to another jokester, and he might be familiar to you. Our larger faith community, Brethren and Mennonites, lost their best-known wit a few weeks ago, and that was Joel Kaufman, who had a comic strip running for 25 years in the Messenger, in the Mennonite World Review, and many other newspapers. He died from a fall. But his job is to puncture holes in our religious pomposity with his comic strip called Pontius's Puddle. How many of you remember seeing Pontius's Puddle? Pontius is a funny-looking frog in a messy bog, and his religion could sure use some help. So in memory of Joel, I'll share a bit. In one cartoon, Pontius says, "Sometimes I'd like to ask God why he allows poverty, famine, and injustice when he could do something about it." His friend inquires, "What's stopping you?" "Well, I'm afraid God might ask me the same question." Another one. "Hi, Pontius. How did your Sunday school discussion go?" "It was great. I exposed 3 misconceptions, I scuttled 2 shallow convictions, and I crushed one individual's entire belief system." Friend walks away thinking, for some people, religion is a contact sport. There's another strip where we see Pontius in 3 different settings. He's at a ball game. "Hooray! Triple overtime!" And he's at a concert. "Encore! Encore!" And it's Sunday morning. If the sermon runs over again, I'm finding another church. So I hope that, like Car Talk on the radio, we're going to continue to see these comic strips even after the loss of the author. Cindy Llewellyn said to me, each one of us has a sermon within us. And we heard her sermon. It was worship. Remember that? My sermon is, in the words of Pope Francis, care of our common home. I'm wondering, what is your sermon? And when will we hear it? Over a period of a couple of weeks, I have been reading Lamentations almost daily. For the most part, it is not comfortable reading. The Hebrew title of this book is Eka, meaning alas. And the writer is not known for certain. Some people think Jeremiah just because of the theme, but there's no evidence for that. This small book in the prophets has an almost perfect structure. There are 5 carefully composed poems, 1 to a chapter. The first 2 are a cry of Eka, alas, about the loss of homeland, starving children, ruin, desolation, and also about the sin that plunged the people into that situation. It is about the destruction of Jerusalem, as you might know, and the survivors taken in captivity to a foreign land. But the center poem, poem 3, this is the one we just read. Here the poet turns to God and expresses his hope. It's a section we just read. We could call this the Great is Thy Faithfulness section. I said these poems have an interesting structure. You might look at them closely and say, wow, isn't that a coincidence? They all have 22 verses, except for chapter 3, which in my Bible is divided up into lines, so it has 66. So. Now you and I are not capable of recognizing this, but most of these are an acrostic of the Hebrew alphabet. So each one begins with a different letter of the alphabet. 1 verse to a letter. Aleph, Bet, Gimel, and so on. And what that suggests to me is that these poems were to be memorized and recited, and the acrostic structure would make it easier for people to do that. These Israelites, who were displaced persons, refugees, could remember their loss and sorrow together. They could mourn, they could turn together to the faithfulness of their Lord. The horrors that the writer of Lamentation describes, starvation, thirst, violation, destitution, lack of human dignity, these are not unknown today to thousands upon thousands of displaced persons, refugees today. Last Thursday, such a family appeared at the door of Morgantown Church of the Brethren. They were Rabab, her husband Josefa, and their daughter-in-law Marwa. They are living today in Morgantown as refugees, and they are not the only ones. They are refugees from the civil war in Syria. Their homes, their neighborhoods destroyed, their livelihood non-existent. They heard about this English language play reading group offered here, and they came to join us. The stories that they told are heartbreaking. Homes destroyed, the loss of their work as both medical doctors, their scattered family. Their grief was palpable. Home, homeland. The loss of home is bitter. And this book, Lamentations, has led me to reflect on the daily destruction of our only home, our earth. Eka. Eka. But we got some help last week from Pope Francis, or Papa Francesca, which sounds more graceful to me. So I Googled Papa Francesca. On Care for Our Common Home. This is the subtitle of the long-anticipated and earlier leaked encyclical. What? We all wonder, what is an encyclical? It's just a letter, a very long letter, that goes around the world to the global church. I quickly downloaded it and printed it before I noticed it was 91 pages long, including 11 pages of footnotes. Even though my paper is 30% recycled, I do have to find a way to atone for those 91 pages. You're welcome to borrow it. The encyclical from Francis is entitled Laudato Si, or Be Praised. And that echoes the famous Canticle of the Sun that St. Francis of Assisi wrote in medieval Italian around the year 1224. The hymn praises God and his creations and speaks of Brother Sun, Sister Moon, and our sister, Mother Earth, who sustains and governs us, and who produces various fruits, colorful flowers, and herbs. Now, this encyclical is different. In the past, encyclicals were directed toward Catholic bishops around the world. This one, says Papa Francesca, is directed toward everyone. He even includes 2 closing prayers, one for Christians and one for everybody else, so that everybody is included. Our sister, he goes on, now cries out to us because of the harm we have inflicted on her by our irresponsible use and abuse of the goods with which God has endowed her. This is why the earth herself, burdened and laid waste, is among the most abandoned and maltreated of our poor. She groans in travail. We have forgotten that we ourselves are dust of the earth. Our very bodies are made up of her elements. We breathe her air, and we receive life and refreshment from her waters. He goes on in these 91 pages to advocate a relational ethic, not depending on technology to save us. He looks to relationships, relationships with one another, relationships with the poor of the earth, relationships with one another, relationships with nature. And he looks very much toward the future, something we don't always wish to do. I'm going to read a few lines from the writer Terry Tempest Williams, who is also calling us to the future. And I quote, "The eyes of the future are looking back at us, and they are praying that we might see beyond our time. They are kneeling with hands clasped that we might act with restraint, that we might leave room for the life that is destined to come. To protect what is wild is to protect what is gentle. Perhaps the wildness we fear is the pause between our own heartbeats, the silent space that says we live only by grace. Wildness, wilderness lives by this same grace. Wild mercy is in our hands." 4 years ago, when the kids were out for a late spring camp out and learning time, they went around the farm. Each age group, each class planted a different tree. And although I was handicapped at the time and wasn't able to walk, so I didn't go along, I think I know where all those trees are. I think I can identify each one. Still growing, getting a lot of rain. I think a lot about trees. Do you have a favorite tree? Is there a tree somewhere that means a lot to you? If you don't have your own tree, you can think about our big tree at the picnic area, getting some water today. During waiting worship, I want you to curl up under that tree. And in your imagination, the sun will be shining, it will not be raining. Gaze up at the sky through the leaves. And then as you're thinking, maybe something will occur to you. Some step, some little step. Some energy-saving step. Some action that you've been thinking about doing with your family. And you might just resolve to take that step. And if nothing comes to your mind, then you just enjoy that, the contemplation of the tree. So for waiting worship, curl up under your tree and look up at the sky.